and start over. So, where do we get all this electricity that we use every day?
Coal.
From coal. And where is that? How is that coal turned into electricity?
By the power plant.
The Hawthorne power plant down by the river takes that coal and burns it, and it operates steam engines that generate steam generators, spin around, and it produces electricity. Do you remember when I showed you the video of Mammoth Springs and the dam they built and the little building that they're, so that at one time the little city of Thayer, Missouri could get their electricity from water power? From the water from Mammoth Springs would turn these little generators that would make electricity. But now we use so much electricity, that little power plant just won't do it. So we need bigger sources. So we bring those railroad cars to town, 120 at a time, full of coal, and burn it up. And it takes what? Just about 5 days to burn up 120 cars worth of coal down at the Hawthorne power plant to produce all of our electricity. And it happens. There you are, Adrian. Got you right here. It happens that we could cut our electric use. Okay, it takes about 4 or 5 days to burn up all 120 cars of coal to make enough electricity for us to use in Kansas City. But we could cut that in half if we would just tell the power plant to do what? Shut down for 12 hours a day. If the power plant shut down for 12 hours a day, what would be happening here in this classroom?
Not class.
We wouldn't have the computer. We wouldn't have the webcam to broadcast it to the online students. We wouldn't have the lights. Your phones wouldn't work. Your laptops wouldn't work. So they're just not going to shut it down. We're just going to keep burning coal to generate electricity. Now, didn't I show you the picture on Wednesday of how Kansas City Power and Light is diversifying, how they only get like 43% of their energy comes from coal and the rest of it comes from other sources? Did I show you that little graph from Kansas City Power and Light? You can go there and say, where does Kansas City Power and Light get their electricity? And it'll show you what percent comes from where. But some of it comes from wind generation. Have you been by a wind farm? Have you driven down the highway and see a whole bunch of those big things out there turning? They're producing electricity. And KCP&L, that provides the electricity for us to live here for about 1 million people to live here in the greater Kansas City area, they get that power from down at Hawthorne, burning coal. But they get some of their power for other places from nuclear power plants, from wind power plants, and some of it from natural gas, where they just use natural gas to run those turbines. So, do you know where the electricity comes from in your hometown? Well, all you have to do is just go to the internet and Google, where does my hometown power come from? Where does whatever city get their electricity? And you can pretty well figure it out to see where it's coming from. I'm thinking probably Wichita, Kansas gets a lot of theirs from natural gas. Now here's why I'm thinking that, Anna, because natural gas in that part of Kansas, they have the greatest volume of natural gas resources in the United States. So probably they're tapping natural gas for some of the stuff they're doing. But I notice when I drive to Oklahoma to visit family, There's a bunch of these great big windmills going out there south of Wichita generating electricity. So maybe they're trying to get some of their energy from there. I don't know exactly what they're doing. On page 350, it shows a distribution of fossil fuels. Look at this table, table 9.1 on page 350. Who has the most crude oil in the world?
Saudi Arabia.
And guess what? We're very friendly with Saudi Arabia. Why would we be so friendly with them? And why would we help them and support them if somebody threatened to invade them?
Because we want
their oil. So we're going to protect them so they'll keep selling oil to us. Who has the next after Saudi Arabia? They have 267. Who's next?
Canada.
178. Who's next?
Iran.
Iran, and then Iraq, and then Kuwait, and then Venezuela, then the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Libya. Wait a minute. You people from Texas, I thought they had, in Oklahoma, they have oil fields all over the place. Where are we?
United States.
How much crude oil do we have? How many billions barrels of crude oil have we pretty much found in this country? 21 billion barrels. How many billion barrels in Saudi Arabia? 267? That's about 12 times what we have. No wonder we're so friendly with Saudi Arabia. Because the way we drive cars, isn't crude oil where we get our gasoline? You don't know. I just go to the pump and put in my plastic cars and fill up and drive off. Well, guess what? There was a time in this country a few years ago when there was a gas shortage. Those OPEC countries, those oil producing, notice how many of those oil producing countries are in the Middle East. Those oil producing countries got together and said, we're going to raise the price of oil to the point to where you people in America can't afford it. And there were long lines at gas stations where people were trying to fill up before the pumps went dry. And somebody said, we better change the way we deal with the people who have all the crude oil in the world if we're going to keep our cars going. And then somebody else said, you know what? If that's the way they want to be and they don't want to do business with us, then fine. We'll find another way to get our cars around instead of burning gasoline made from crude oil. Anybody have a car that you pull in the driveway and plug it in to charge it up overnight before you drive to work tomorrow? I'm thinking that's going to be my next car, if I live that long. How come I don't have an electric car now? They cost too much. And eventually the price will come down. And I might just be driving to school in a little electric car someday, especially since I have an all-electric home. And you say, yeah, but what about, you need coal to keep that generator going? Okay, let's go from crude oil over to coal. Who has the most coal in the world?
The U.S.
What? There we are. We're sitting on all this coal. So guess what? If we want to argue about who's got something, we've got the coal. We've got enough coal to run that power plant for as long as we want to. Yes, but it's polluting the air and we need to change some of that. Okay, so how could we change that? Well, let's see. let's just talk in generalities about how we could cut the use of fossil fuels in half. The first one was just have the power and light company cut the electricity off for half the day. Or have them go an hour on, an hour off, an hour on, an hour off. That way you'd keep your stuff in your refrigerator from going bad. That wouldn't work for you, Celeste?
No, because there's people like in the hospital who have like needs, like they have to stay alive.
Yeah,
They need
so
power
it's just
to-
like, that's not gonna, okay, so let's see, what else can we do?
You turn it off at the night, during night.
I still have to stay alive during the night.
Well, that's true. I meant we could turn
Yeah,
off
those
in
people in the
homes.
hospital still need that care in the middle of the night.
We could turn off certain places.
You know what? Maybe, okay, the first car I drove, the first car I bought when I was a teenager was a 55 Chevrolet with 350 horses under the hood. Boom, 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 boom. It got about 12 miles to the gallon. But it didn't matter. Gas only cost like 25 cents a gallon.
Wow.
So I would just drive my 350 horses. If I was born in Roman times, that means I would have a chariot to go to school in with 350 horses hooked up in front of it. That's a bit overkill. Today, I drive a car that I think it has 54 horsepower. That's the equivalent of having 54 horses tied in front of my car. If they could run fast enough to make it go 70 miles an hour. Which they couldn't. But do you see where we could change the rules to say, in fact, we already changed the rules. We've said if we're burning oil and we don't have that much of it and we have to import it from other countries, then let's make our cars more fuel efficient. So my first car got about 12 miles to the gallon. The car I drive now gets about 40 miles to the gallon. So you see what's happened? We've increased our efficiency 4 times. Yeah, but the little car you drive now, can it go boom, 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 boom at a traffic light? No, it doesn't do that. It sounds like a little sewing machine. Zing, 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 zing. But you know what? I'm saving on gas, you follow me? So I'm not burning as much crude oil when I drive down the road. And so I'm happy to drive this little car because it doesn't put as much pollutant in the air. So what about this electricity thing, Tom? What are we going to do to save coal? Well, you know, I really don't need, I mean, how big a house do you need to live in? Have any of you driven to Old Town Belton to see how tiny some of the old homes are? Have any of you ever driven to an old town where you can tell where the new part of town is and the old part of town is? In the old part of town, they have tiny little homes. And in the new part of town, they have great big homes that are probably 5 times as big as the tiny ones. Now, could we all live in tiny little homes if we really wanted to?
Mm-hmm.
And look what that would do in terms of what they call our carbon footprint. Look what that would do in terms of how much electricity it would take to heat and cool my house if it was half the size it is now. So it won't surprise me if your generation decides that, see, you can almost tell how old a neighborhood is by looking at the size of the homes, because they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the future homes start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. People just say, you don't need a house that big. And if you have a house that big, then instead of having one family live there, have 2 families live there, have 3 families live there, and then it's like, instead of 3 different homes, you've got 3 families living in one big home. So I can see some changes coming down the road, just in an effort to save some coal, even though we've got, say, hey, see, we got more than enough coal to last beyond my lifetime, and beyond your lifetime, so don't worry about it. Yeah, but you understand, somebody has to think about the future, and right now, we're thinking more about the polluting the air than we are the future. So let's just talk about ways to cut down our carbon footprint. And you say, let's just build smaller homes. And what else can we do? Well, I do something to contribute to minimizing the carbon footprint. I don't wear a watch. Don't watches require batteries? And to make those batteries to run the watch? Why would I wear a watch? I have a watch in every classroom where I teach. I have a clock in every classroom. I have a clock in my car. I have clocks everywhere. Why do I need one on my wrist when there's clocks every place I go? Don't you even have one on your phone? So who needs a wristwatch? You understand? Just start thinking about what could I do to save how much electricity I use or how much of the natural resources I'm consuming on a regular basis in my life. Okay, so the United States has the most coal on page 350. Who's next after the United States? Russia. Who's next?
China.
So who are the three biggest polluters in terms of burning coal in the world? The United States, Russia, and China. You follow what's going on? And then it goes down from there. So there's only one other thing to look at, and that's natural gas. And who's got all the natural gas in the world?
Russia.
Russia is sitting on a whole bunch of natural resources, aren't they? I mean, look over at oil. We have 20 billions. Russia has 60 billion. They have 3 times as much oil as crude oil as we have. What? We have 238 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Russia has 1,680. That's about 8 times as much natural gas as we have. We have 263,000 tons of coal, million tons of coal. Russia has 173. Okay, so we have more, a little bit more, but you understand? Russia is sitting on, oh, and by the way, now that we're talking about Russia, Russia is sitting on a lot of the world's natural resources. Any idea what that means? Now do you understand why Russia decided that we can keep people happy if we tell them, you don't have to pay to heat your house, we'll take care of heating it for you. They have all that natural gas that they just tap into it. Not only do they heat the big apartment buildings, they heat the subway. They heat everything in Russia. They just turn the heat on. But you need to know this. When it gets cold in Russia, you don't go over to the thermostat and turn the heat on. Our daughter and son-in-law lived in Moscow for 8 years, and they had a missionary friend that had lived there longer than they had. The missionary friend came back to live in Minnesota. They went to church one Sunday and said, it is so cold, when is the city going to turn on the heat? And the people at church said, what? He said, when does Minneapolis turn the heat on? And they said, they don't turn the heat on. That's why you have a thermostat at your house. You decide when to turn the heat on. And they go, oh, because they were so accustomed to Russia, and Russia doesn't decide when it's cold enough we'll turn it on. They decide when to turn it on in advance, and that's when they turn it on. And if it gets cold early, too bad, tough it out. If it gets cold late, and if they leave it on longer and it starts to get warm, too bad, open the windows and let all the heat fly out the window, because we've turned on the heat, we've turned off the heat, and that's the way it's going to be. And so you say, well, what about air conditioning in the summertime? Well, air conditioning requires electricity. Electricity requires coal. That's what we have a lot of. I don't think Russia wants everybody having an air conditioner in their apartment. Actually, if you look at the globe and see how far north Moscow is, have any of you lived someplace where it doesn't get hot enough to need air conditioning? Have any of you lived someplace where it's hot enough to want air conditioning, but there's none available? You just don't have it. You just have to learn to tough it out.
You sit in class sweating.
And that's just life, isn't it? It's like, hey, that's just what it is. You open the windows, hope there's a breeze coming through, and if there's not a breeze coming through, then you just sweat. That's just the way it is in a great many parts of the world. Let's get back to talking about what we can do to save coal. What could we do to save coal? Okay, I get 40 miles a gallon with my little Honda Civic. Most people, I go to watch my grandson play baseball. Most people in the car lot are driving these big SUVs. Does anyone know how many miles per gallon an SUV gets? Well, I think it's less than half of mine. So why don't we pass a law that says we won't burn as much crude oil if everybody has to drive a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla, or what would be the other one? A Nissan Sentra, or a Chevrolet, what would that be? The tiny little Chevrolet? You don't know. You all want to drive big, heavy cars that make a statement and burn twice as much gas, people.
I think we want to buy cheap cars because we don't have any money.
So you just buy old, cheap cars, and guess what? When you're buying an old car, usually the cheapest one is a little one. So what are you going to do to save coal? Now, they say, I don't burn coal. No, but you burn electricity. You use electricity, and we get that from coal. So what are you going to do to save coal?
Turn off your lights.
Turn your lights off. Don't have as many lights burning in your house. What about changing all the light bulbs in your house to these new expensive light bulbs that use 1/5 as much electricity? What that means is, if I change out the standard light bulbs in my house, I can replace 5 light bulbs and only use as much energy as I used to use for one to light all of the house. Why wouldn't everybody do that? Does anyone know what those what are the names they use for those bulbs now?
Fluorescent.
They're not fluorescent. They're even more expensive than that. They cost, I think they cost like $5 or $6 a piece. When a normal bulb that burns 5 times as much electricity costs about $1. So can you see why people aren't buying those $5 light bulbs to put throughout their house? Anything else we could do? We could turn off our air conditioners. We could. Now see, I don't wear a watch, and I drive a car that gets 40 miles to the gallon. And I never turn off my air conditioner to save energy. I have become too acclimated. Anyone know what I'm talking about? I am so addicted to air conditioning. How about driving a car without air conditioning? One time I tried to drive my car without heat in the dead of winter. That will freeze your toes off. But I thought, leave the air conditioner off. I told my wife one time, when we were headed to a trip when our girls were little, we headed to a trip to Oklahoma, I said, you know, if we don't run the air conditioner, we can get better mileage on the car, and it won't take as much gas to make the trip down there. And she said, just exactly how much money will we save if we don't run the air conditioner? And I told her how many dollars it would be. And you know what she did? She looked at me and she said, turn on the air conditioner. If we have to save that much money, then we can save it someplace else. Now, if I would have said, like where, you know what she probably would have said? We can have you eat oatmeal for breakfast instead of Cheerios. Now, why would she suggest something like that? What do I have every morning to get me started off to have a great day? A bowl of Cheerios. So she's going to pick on the thing that I'm going to buy no matter what it costs, because that's the way I start my day, with a bowl of Cheerios. And you say, okay, so in fact, Al Gore went on a big campaign. I think he wrote a book called The Inconvenient Truth. And the truth is that there's a whole bunch of people that are causing global warming by the way they live. And somebody drove by his house and took a picture of it. Now, if he's really concerned about global warming, would you think he would live in a tiny little house or a great big mansion? That's what I would think too, Celeste. No, he lives in... Now, there are some wealthy people who live in tiny little houses because they want to make a small footprint. But Al Gore isn't one of them, and he's writing a book on what you and I need to do. And see, this to me is strange. Why does somebody on the East Coast want to write a book on what you and I should do to save energy when he's not doing everything he can to save energy? I mean, Las Vegas wastes a whole lot of electricity doing what? Have you ever driven through Las Vegas in the middle of the night? That place is lit up like daylight. They've got lights everywhere. Turn them off, people. You don't need all those neon signs. But it's just part of what makes Las Vegas, Las Vegas. That's the same with New York City. Turn the lights off. You need street lights so people can see to get from place to place, but get rid of all that other stuff. But do you understand? No way. That's part of what makes us what we are. And what I think really happens is, what needs to happen is, we need to say, what can I do to make a smaller carbon footprint, to put less CO2 in the air, carbon dioxide? The oxygen's okay, it's that carbon that's going with it. What can I do to make a smaller carbon footprint and to improve the air quality? Then I'll do something. But I get kind of tired of people who keep telling me how I should change the way I live to make life better for the world, when they're not willing to make the kind of changes. When someone says to me, I think you should stop eating beef since chicken converts, remember from the last chapter? Chicken converts grain to meat much more efficiently than beef does. So you quit eating beef and start eating chicken. And I'm going to say, so guess who's telling me that? Somebody who eats chicken all the time and doesn't have the same appetite for beef that I have. So I'm going to find out something they like to do and say, tell you what, why don't you quit doing that? And I think it just becomes a thing. You ought to quit doing this, you ought to quit doing that. It's like, wait a minute, let's talk about what we can stop doing, or what we can change the way we live to make the world a better place. To not, okay, I happen to believe, from a Christian perspective, that God gave us enough natural resources to last as long as He wants us to live on this earth. But is it possible that we've been using them up a little faster than He intended, just because we become a little wasteful? So we might ought to think about being better stewards of the natural resources that God has given us. On page 351, it talks about oil production and prices, supply and demand, and how sometimes OPEC, the oil-producing nations, would withhold oil to raise the price up. let's see, what's been the range of, remember I told you when I first started driving, I could buy gasoline for 25 cents a gallon. And now it costs what? $2.50 a gallon? 10 times as much? Oh, wait a minute. If you get a job working at a store here in town, how much do they pay per hour?
8 something.
I hear Walmart's advertising $10 an hour. Okay, when I paid 25 cents a gallon for gas, guess what I was paid per hour to work? $1 an hour. So for an hour's worth of work, I could buy 4 gallons of gas. If you can earn $10 an hour and gas costs $2.50 a gallon, you're about in the same boat I was in. You'll spend about 1 hour of work to buy 4 gallons of gas. It's about the same. So it hasn't changed all that much. It's just that the total equation has changed a great deal. But during your lifetime, what's the cheapest you've paid for gas? You don't know? What's the most you've paid for gas? You say, I don't know. My dad gave me a credit card. I just go up to the pump, slide it in there, buy the gas, and I'm on my way. Well, think about it and maybe say, I maybe should think about how many trips I make to Walmart every week. And then if you live on campus and you have a car and other people don't, people are always asking for a ride. So you say, I go to Walmart once a week to save money. If you want to go more often than that, you can pay for the gas. And they say, okay, I will. And they say, what's it cost? You say $1 will cover it. Can you drive to Walmart and back for $1 worth of gas? $1 would buy about a half a gallon. How many miles to Walmart? You don't know. What if I said 5? How many miles back? 5. So 10 miles to Walmart and back. How many miles to the gallon does your car get? You don't even know that. If my car gets 40 miles to the gallon and it's 10 gallons, I can make 4 trips to Walmart on a gallon of gas. I can make 4 trips for $2.50. That's 60 cents to go to Walmart and back. If someone pays me $1 to ride with me, I'm thinking I need to go to Walmart every day just to have people pay me $1 to take them up there. And if they want to go for free, they wait to go to Walmart on the day that I go on my own. Actually, I don't have to go on my own anymore. I have so many people wanting rides to Walmart that pay me $1 that I just do my shopping while I've taken them up there. None of you thought about turning your automobile into a money-making machine while you're a student at Calvary? No, you say, I just am generous and give to everybody. Well, the next time you're going to fill up with gas, let me know so I can park my car next to yours and you can pay for mine too. No, I'm not that generous. Okay, and it talks about on page 352 how the world gets adjusted to higher prices and then all of a sudden the price drops. And it shows gas lines in the 1970s, people in line, wait here, odd number plates, 10 gallons only, half tank or less. I mean, at one time there was a real crisis in this country on what are you going to have to, no matter how much money you have, you can only buy so much gas. Oh, I should tell you, when that happened, by the way, some rich people bought gas stations so they could go up after hours and fill their cars up with gas and have all the gas they wanted. On page 354, it talks about, about pumping crude oil out of the ground. But do you know about oil shale and oil tar sandstone? Do you know anything about fracking? See, they've developed new methods to get more of the oil out of the ground. And that's part of what brought the price down. But also, it costs more to get it out of the ground that way, so that's part of what made the price go up. On page 353, even though we don't get most of our electricity from nuclear energy, the book talks about it because some people get a lot of their energy. Did I show you the map of the United States with all the nuclear power plants on it on Wednesday? Didn't we look at that? On the East Coast, they get a lot of their energy from nuclear power. Oh, we should read this on page 355. Nuclear power can be generated either by fission, splitting an atom into two or more parts, or by fusion, joining two atoms together. Most peaceful generation of nuclear power today relies on fission of uranium. Although plutonium also can be used, someday we may use fusion to generate nuclear power, but as yet such technology is unavailable. Unlike solar or wind energy, nuclear energy is not renewable. You know what that means? It's based on using uranium, radioactive uranium, and uranium doesn't restore itself. The wind keeps blowing and solar keeps shining, so you don't use that energy up. But with uranium, we could eventually use it up. Does it? No, it doesn't talk about uranium over there as to how much uranium there is in the world. Like coal, nuclear power presents serious problems. These include potential accidents, the generation of radioactive waste. Some people don't know that with coal, they burn it up and the smoke goes up in the air. With a nuclear power plant, when they use up the radioactive material that they put inside there to create the energy, they have these waste containers of radioactive material that they have to store someplace. And at one time, Arizona said, hey, if you pay us enough money, you can store it here. And then Arizona got some new people in charge who said, we don't want your nuclear waste anymore. And some nuclear power plants having a hard time finding some place to ship their waste have just accumulated it in barrels in warehouses around their power plant. And some people are trying to figure out ways to use that waste in a productive fashion, because that's the big problem with nuclear power. Potential accidents. Well, we had a fire at the Hawthorne power plant in 2012 that everybody in Kansas City got pretty alarmed about. But it wasn't like Chernobyl. Have any of you looked at pictures of Chernobyl, what happened when that thing melted down, and how much devastation it caused? So basically they're saying we need to make sure whatever we do, we avoid having a nuclear meltdown like they had in Chernobyl. And when you look at the picture on page 356, this picture's a little outdated, but obviously Illinois gets a lot of their energy from nuclear power. The radioactive waste is the second concern, and public opposition, because people say, I don't want a nuclear power plant in my backyard. I mean, if someone said, okay, the Hawthorne plant burns coal, and you see trains of coal coming here, bringing coal, and you see the smoke coming out of the smokestack where they're burning it, and you go, hey, that's the price of having electricity. If somebody said, let's build right next to the Hawthorne power plant a nuclear power plant, Can you see where people in Kansas City might say, I don't think I want a nuclear power plant there just because of the risk of radioactivity? So what do? They build one down in Kansas and they build one up in Nebraska. If you look at where Kansas City is on this map, and they build one down in southeastern Missouri. So if you look at Kansas City, you say, okay, so here we are, and it looks like they've built power plants, nuclear power plants, far enough away from us to where people aren't afraid of them because they think it's so far away it won't hurt us if they have an accident. On page 357, it talks about biomass. There's a college in Nebraska, I think, or Iowa. I can't remember. I was reading about it a while back, and they're trying to heat their campus in the wintertime with biomass. You say, what is biomass? Well, do any of you have a wood-burning stove? Do any of you burn wood in a fireplace? Do any of you have a coal-burning stove? Do any of you have a kerosene stove? Do any of you ever go camping and just throw some logs on a fire and light it to keep yourself warm? Okay, that's biomass. Burning wood, burning coal, burning wood is biomass. What about burning grass? Have you ever burnt grass? That'll make a lot of heat too. And this school in Nebraska decided that they were going to take their heating system at their school and start burning grass in it. Now, if you're going to burn grass to heat your whole campus, you better have some place where you can harvest a lot of grass and where it'll grow back real fast so you can harvest some more of it. There's some cool stuff on the internet about biomass. I think the grossest thing, my wife says when I tell her this stuff, she goes, Tom, TMI, TMI. You know what that means? Too much information? I think it's some people in Iowa said, you know, these pig farms and these dairy farms in northern Missouri have a lot of waste material floating around in a pond from feeding pigs and feeding cattle. And if you cover that pond with a great big tent and collect the methane, guess what you can do? You can turn it into energy, to either electrical energy, running generators, or into heat energy to heat your house. And she goes, I don't want to hear about that. And then those of you who live in Africa, you know, and especially this is true in India, where animals, where cattle are sacred. People go out and collect cow chips. Okay, now here's the TMI of it, folks. A cow eats a lot of grass, but they don't digest all the grass completely. So a lot of it passes through their body, and when it plops on the ground and it dries, people can pick it up and put it in the stove and burn it like firewood. So there you go. I guess if you're looking for some biomass, get yourself a bunch of cows and just let them roam around and go out and pick up cow chips and burn them in your furnace. Well, enough of that. Page 358 talks about hydroelectric power. Do any of you have any hydroelectric power close to you? Okay, have any of you ever been to Bagnell Dam in Missouri? Have any of you ever been to a huge dam anywhere? Where? Have you been to the dam outside of Las Vegas? Have you been to Branson?
Yeah.
And have you driven down by the lake across that big dam? Okay, in every one of these places where they build these big dams, here's how you can tell. If inside the dam there's an electric generator where the water runs through the dam and spins the generator to make electricity, if there's one of those in the dam, what will you see outside? What will you see as outside evidence of a generator in a dam across a lake? Great big towers with wires on them. In fact, if you drive from here to Bagnell Dam, obviously none of you have done that. On the way, you will see these huge big metal towers with wires carrying electricity from Bagnell Dam to Kansas City. Because some of the electricity we use is hydroelectric power. It's generated, most of the electricity that they use in Las Vegas is generated by the Hoover Dam. And watch what they say. Hey, since the water's running over it anyway, we might as well leave the lights on. If it produces enough electricity to leave the lights on all the time, leave the lights on all the time. But watch this. This to me is interesting. Lake Mead, which is the lake that flows over Hoover Dam. Lake Mead, they had a drought out in the Las Vegas area. Lake Mead, the level of water kept falling, but that's also where Las Vegas gets their drinking water and the water to water their lawns and to make everything and all their fountains. So guess what happened? Las Vegas said, it's time to do away with grass in our lawns and go back to what was here naturally, to rock lawns and cactus, because we need to save the water in Lake Mead to run the generator to keep the lights on in Las Vegas. And Lake Mead kept getting lower and lower and lower, and there were all kinds of pictures of it. And then finally we got all the rain to bring it all back. So they're saying, okay, we've got plenty of water, so we can all go back to watering our lawns again. So hydroelectric power just comes from a dam. And you'll know it if you're ever driving. Have any of you been to Niagara Falls?
No.
Well, you people who don't travel, just Google hydroelectric power. Just Google hydroelectric power and see where it is in America. Man, get out there and see something. You go to Worlds of Fun and don't even know the Hawthorne plant that keeps the electricity going is right off to your right. You say, who cares as long as the electricity's coming? Well, it's nice to know where it comes from. Solar energy is also talked about on page 358. And just Google hydroelectric power plants and it'll show you where they are. Solar energy, I have a neighbor who just put in a whole big array of solar panels out in his pasture. And if my electric bill is about $400 a month, an all-electric home, I said, I think I'm going to check into that because I think he's got enough panels out there to where he doesn't pay anything for electricity now when the sun's shining. When the sun's not shining, he gets it from the city like I do. But did you know in the daytime when the sun is really shining bright like this and he's at work and he's not using much electricity, did you know that the electricity from his solar panels is going into his house but he's not using it all? So it's running his electric meter backwards. It's the electricity is going into the Kansas City Power and Light system. So he's getting credit for his extra electricity by running his meter the other direction.
Time to add solar panels.
So in a sense, he's selling some electricity to the city, and then when he needs it later on, when it's cloudy, he gets it back and buys it back. And so it's a good system. And I said, I'm going to check into that. So I got on the internet and started checking out solar energy and what it would cost to put some panels out in my pasture.
A lot.
In fact, I'm thinking it was like $60,000 to $80,000.
Spirit.
And they said, yeah, but watch, if you're spending $400 a month, that's $5,000 a year. In 50 years, or no, $5,000 a year, divide 5 into $60,000. That's 5,000 into 60,000, 5 into 60. In 12 years, you'll have paid for your solar panels. And then after that, it's all free. And I said, you know how old I'll be in 12 years? They go, no, how old will you be? I said, I'll be gone in 12 years. I'll be in heaven in 12 years. Well, then you could leave it to whoever buys your house. Let the people who buy my house when I die buy their own solar panels. And by the way, this guy has his house on the market. The guy that put the solar panels in about 5 years ago, he's got his house on the market and he's trying to sell it. And he's asking a whole bunch of money for his house. Any idea why he wants such an outlandish price for his house?
Because you paid a lot for this.
Because he needs to recoup the money he spent on the solar panels that he hasn't recouped yet. So he's going to have to find a buyer who wants to buy a house with solar panels and pay for part of his solar panel purchase. And so far he hasn't sold his house. But, you know what I'm thinking? In 10 years, my grandchildren sometimes have discussions as to who gets to live in our house when we go to heaven, because it's a pretty nice place to live. So our grandchildren talk about who's going to live there. And I said, there's enough room for all of you to move in. Just don't fight about it. But you know what? It wouldn't surprise me that by the time I've gone to heaven and my grandkids are living in the house, that there's plenty of room to put solar panels out in the pasture, but solar panels that would cost $60,000 now will probably be down to more like what, $30,000 or $20,000. And they'll even be more efficient. Oh, and another thing I should mention too, the guy who wants to sell you a solar panel says, so you'll have them paid for in 12 years. And here was the question I asked him. So in 12 years, will they still be working? He said, oh yeah, solar panels will work forever. Nothing works forever. Things break down, right? So you have to factor that in too. Okay, on page 359 is a picture of wind energy. A wind farm in Illinois. I see that when I drive to Oklahoma. I see a wind farm in Kansas. Have you seen wind farms anywhere? Where have you seen wind farms?
Indiana.
Indiana? Where else?
All over.
All over? Everywhere they're putting in these wind farms. Why do they call it a wind farm? Because look at all these towers they put up out there. I mean, see them back there? It's just as far as you can see. There's these things just going, Have you been near one to hear what it sounds like? You thought they didn't make any noise? Have you ever been around a windmill? You think windmills make noise. You should hear these things making the noise they make to generate electricity. I'm just telling you. Say, well, no, I don't hear anything looking at the picture. Well, no, because the picture doesn't convey the noise. But I tell you, the good thing I like about this picture is they've got a wind farm here, but what else are they raising on this farm besides wind? I mean, the guy who rents the land to them to build these towers, to collect wind power, he's still planting crops, isn't he? He gets to drive around there and still gets to use the land to plant his crops. That to me is a pretty good idea. So I thought, well, if solar panels are expensive, maybe I should just get one of these things and put it out in my pasture. Why are you saying no? Why do you think that's a bad idea?
It drives all the animals away. Because there's constant movement.
You know, there's a guy about 3 miles from my house who put one of these things in at his house. And I said to my wife, we got to check into that. That's a cool idea. We live up on a hill. He put it in, and a year later it was gone. Why did they take it down? His neighbors didn't like the noise, and they didn't like seeing it sticking way up in the air, spoiling their view of the sunset. Okay, has any of you been to Pennsylvania to drive through the mountains in Pennsylvania? Are they beautiful? Okay, now, have you been to Pennsylvania since they started putting those wind towers on top of all those mountain ranges?
I mean, I used to live there, so I don't know.
Okay, I first started going to Pennsylvania to be a visiting professor at a college in the summertime. And when I first started going out there, the mountains were beautiful. 10 years later, by the time I quit, during my last 2 years of going out there, they were building these, they were sticking these things up. So on the top of every mountain range was tower, 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 collecting wind power. I'm just going to tell you, it just looked ugly. What would happen in Colorado if somebody started putting wind towers on top of all the beautiful peaks? I'm thinking it's not going to happen. The people in Colorado, they are not going to let that happen. But some farmer out here in Kansas who says, hey, I can still raise crops on my land and you'll pay me money to put those windmills out there, go ahead. Now, you said, yeah, but it'll drive the animals away. He goes, good, then the rabbits won't eat my corn anymore. You follow what happens? But if he's a dairy farmer, he says what? If these things upset dairy cattle so they don't produce as much milk, I don't want a wind farm on my dairy farm. But I don't think the noise from these things affects the quality of corn or wheat or barley, does it? So you can still raise some crops like that. How many homes can you power with a single one of these things? Well, according to one of the articles I found on the internet, a guy out in Idaho, they were building a lot of these out there, and he said, well, according to what they tell me, one of these towers that produces a megawatt of electricity, a megawatt is enough electricity to provide electricity to 100 homes. Well, that means we could just take 100 homes and put one of these things out there in the middle of it and produce electricity. And the people would get used to the noise because they get electricity from it. But then he said, but when I did some more research, the people who sell them say they'll provide electricity for 100 homes, but he said it's really more like, it varies, because what has to happen for this little machine to generate electricity? The wind has to be blowing. Sometimes the wind blows more, sometimes less. You want to see something interesting? Go to Google and type in electric wind generator self-destructs in a windstorm. And there's a picture of one where the wind is blowing so strong. Some of you seen it? Where it's spinning so fast that it just keeps going, and pretty soon, wham, one of these little propellers flies off, and once that's out of whack, the whole thing just falls apart. And I'm thinking, I hope it's not very close to the highway, because that debris could hurt somebody. But check this stuff out. There's some people saying this really works. A guy did a speech on TEDS, that's the cutting edge technology stuff, who said that out of all these sources of energy that we talk about here, nuclear power is probably the best option we have going for us down the road in terms of replacing all the coal we use. On page 360, it talks about air and water resources. You go, what? We're talking about Earth's resources. Yes. Remember when we first started this class and we talked about the atmosphere and how it's that little thin band of air around the globe, and we need that to stay alive? Well, we need the air to stay alive, but what else do we need? If we close all the doors and we just sit in here and huff and puff as much as we can, do you understand? We have a tendency to use up the oxygen and fill the room up with carbon dioxide. So we want to open the doors and air the room out. Well, so what do I do at my house to balance out this carbon footprint? I plant lots of trees. So when I'm sitting outside my yard, I'm exhaling carbon dioxide, and the trees are soaking it up, and what are they giving off? Oxygen. That's why when my friends come to my house and we sit out in the driveway and we're surrounded by all these trees, they say, boy, the air is so fresh out here. I said, it's pure, undiluted oxygen coming straight from all these trees. Now, have any of you ever been in a city where the air was so polluted that it would burn your eyes or make you choke or cough? Well, it talks on page 360 about air pollution. None of you have ever been anywhere where the air was so polluted that you couldn't breathe very easily. Then you just have to see pictures of it. The pictures you'll see is in China. Just Google China air pollution and you'll see people walking around with little masks on. And they're telling people who have breathing problems, don't go outside. Here in the United States, I'm thinking, how come we don't hear much about air pollution in the Midwest? Okay, Kansas City obviously produces a lot of pollution, agreed? But watch what it does. The pollution goes up into the air, and then as it gets up high, what's happening? The wind is blowing and it carries it away. So it disperses the pollutants throughout such a broad range of open area to where it's not a threat to anybody. Guess which state has the most air pollution in the United States?
New York?
Celeste?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe Chicago?
I would say in Illinois, Chicago would have the most pollution.
Or New York City.
Or maybe...
And I tend to think New York City too.
Is it
Yeah.
California?
It's California.
Oh.
It's California. They have the worst pollution of any state. And when you take the cities that are the most polluted, the top 5 are in California. No wonder California is thinking about passing a law that all the cars have to be electric cars out here. They have a first-class pollution problem. So you've never had to deal with air pollution. Well, my daughter in Moscow, they went back to Moscow early one year to experience the Moscow summer. And wouldn't you know, they had a forest fire around Moscow and they couldn't put it out. And the trees were burning and smoke was just flowing over Moscow. My daughter sent us an email and said, Dad, you can't sleep at night. You cough and you spit up soot, ashes from... Okay, have any of you ever been out in a dust storm where you feel choked up so you cough and the stuff, TMI, I know, the stuff that you spit out has clumps of dirt in it? Okay, see, I lived on a farm in Oklahoma where we would go out and work in a field where we'd be covered with dust. So I knew all about that. And sometimes at night, the wind would blow and cause such a dust storm that you couldn't sleep at night very well. And I said to my daughter, and over in Russia, they were having this forest fire, and I said, Karen, when I was a kid in Oklahoma, we used to take towels and sheets and soak them in water and hang them over the window so that the air would come through the sheet, but the sheet would collect the dirt particles. And so she tried it, and she goes, Dad, it works. We got a good night's sleep last night, but you should see how dirty the towels and the blankets and the sheets are this morning. But I thought, isn't that something that we just did something years ago because of pollution? And she had never experienced pollution, so she didn't know what to do until she got back to Moscow. So what if you live in California? I'd say the best thing to do about the pollution in California is move to Texas.
Amen.
Or Illinois. I could say Oklahoma, but that isn't going to happen. That is, nobody from California is going to move to Oklahoma. Remember the chart we saw back there about what people in California think about Oklahoma? So now you know what Oklahomans think about California. Okay. It talks about, on page 360, under air pollution, acid deposits. Have any of you ever seen a place where trees growing around a factory that has a big smokestack start dying and turning brown? Because acid that's in the pollutants in the air settles on the plants and kills them. Have any of you ever seen a cloud of pollution hanging over Kansas City? The weatherman says, if you can, stay in today. The air is not blowing and the pollutants are just accumulating, and you can see the... Have you ever been outside Kansas City driving back and noticed the air is clear except for kind of a big round cloud hanging over Kansas City? You guys don't look up, do you? You just well, say, no, I'm watching the road so I won't have a wreck. Well, check some of that stuff out. You can just Google pollution in Kansas City and get some pictures of it. Now, it could be when you Google pollution, you better Google air pollution, because what other kind of pollution is there besides air pollution? It's on page 363. It's called water pollution. Have any of you ever lived someplace where there was a boil order?
What?
Yes.
Where they said that the city of Raymore has issued a boil order. That the water coming through the pipes to your house have been contaminated by something. So we're telling you, don't drink the water before you boil it. So where did that happen with you, Celeste?
I was in Texas.
In Texas.
Yeah.
Something happened to where the source of water got polluted, and they told you to boil the water. Did any of you ever live somewhere where you boiled all the water before you use it because you couldn't trust the water coming through the tap?
Well, in Africa, we had to filter it 2 times, but after we got used to it, our bodies didn't need filtered water.
We took a trip to Greece one time, and on the way back, we stopped in Athens at a restaurant, and when you're in Greece, you drink bottled water. Everywhere you go, you buy bottled water, because you drink the water out of the tap, and it'll make you so sick you think you're going to die. We're in a restaurant in Athens, and my wife emptied her bottle of water, and the waiter says, "Would you like me to refill your bottle of water?" She goes, "Oh, thank you very much." And I said, "Nina, you probably shouldn't drink that." She said, "Well, I don't want to make him feel bad." I said, "He probably filled it up at the tap back in the kitchen." She drank it. We got on an airplane to fly back home from Greece. When we got to New York City and landed, she was so sick. They put us up overnight in a hotel, and she was so weak and sick, she couldn't even walk to get from the bed to the bathroom. She was crawling on the floor. And I said, that water in that bottle came right out of the tap in Athens. Don't drink tap water overseas. Now, see, your body acclimated when you live there for a while. If you go someplace to visit, you see, well, all the people who live here are drinking it. Yeah, because their bodies have learned how to fight it off. You are going to pick up more little amoebas from drinking that water and you won't know it till you get home. Although I told some people in Brazil one time, I think I have the latest diet rage. It's called a bottle of tap water from Brazil. You bring it to America, you tell people to drink it, it fills your body with little amoebas that just consume your fat cells like crazy. When you've lost enough weight, they send you a little box of pills that you take to kill all the amoeba so they don't kill you completely. And voila, your diet program was successful. Now try not to go back to your old eating habits and gain it all back again. But I would say we in America don't we take clean, pure, unpolluted water for granted? We just assume the water coming out of the tap is not polluted. Well, we used to anyway. That's part of why bottled water has become so popular. The quality of water coming through the pipes in the United States today has diminished to the point to where a lot of people are saying you better drink bottled water. And then you ask where the bottled water came from. And if it came out of a tap, see, if it comes from a spring in Minnesota or a spring down in Arkansas, I'm thinking that's probably pretty good bottled water. But did you notice on that sign for Mammoth Springs, it said, even though the water looks good, don't drink it. The people upstream where the water comes from have polluted the water supply to where it's not healthy to drink it. But if you use a filter where you pump all the little amoebas out of there, then you can drink the water. Page 364 shows a picture of air pollution in Mexico City. But, you know, it's not just Mexico City. There's a lot of places in the world where you'll see smog and pollution like that. And the picture at the bottom of the page shows water pollution in India and Bangladesh. What gets me is that there are some holy rivers where people go take holy baths, and those rivers are so polluted. I don't know what people are thinking. Page 365 talks about chemical and toxic pollutants. Now, this is probably going to make you mad. But did you know that it used to be chemical plants would build their plants to make chemicals next to a river so they could just flush all of the pollutants from making the chemicals into the river and let it float downstream? And then the Pure Water Act in America, or the Clean Water Act, said we have to stop them from doing that. So most of them said that you're right, that's wrong, we shouldn't have been doing that. Why did they put their pollutants in the river? Because it was a cheap way to dispose of it. So it helped their bottom line make money. But some of them said, okay, you're right, we agree, but then they would sneak their pollutants into the river at night. There's a picture of the Yellow River in China. Some of this toxic pollution that has gone on in the past is just so sad. Do any of you know about some of these places in Missouri where there have been toxic sites that because of what was produced there, it's made the land unlivable? Have any of you seen up here on 150 Highway this great new complex that the government built right on the north side of 150, right north of our campus? No. Well, that plant used to be on Bannister Road. You didn't know it was down there either. It was the Bendix plant. And guess what? Bendix was kind of a secret place where they had all these contracts to make stuff for the government. Guess what kind of stuff they made? Radioactive stuff that had radioactive waste that was buried in the soil in Bannister Bendix complex. And so now all that area is tainted with radioactive stuff, so they had to say, we've got to shut this plant down, and they built another one right north of the campus here. On page 369, it shows a picture of someone harvesting a huge tree in Western Australia. I wish we could get close enough to count the rings in that tree to see how old it is. But for a tree to grow that big probably took a very long time. So here's what that means. If you cut that tree down, then you probably need to plant another one and figure that it's going to be 300 years before that tree is going to be usable by the next generation. So maybe you ought to figure out if there's some way to make the wood from this tree last us for the next 300 years. You know what some people are doing to help preserve the forest? Have you ever seen an old abandoned barn out in a pasture somewhere? Or out in a field when you're driving down the highway? Well, some people are now going out and dismantling those barns, and they're taking the lumber from that barn and they're using it to build houses and furniture and other things so that the wood doesn't go to waste, which I think is a good idea. I mean, yes, if you use a tree, then plant another one. And most of the harvesting, the forest harvesting that's done in America, is done places where they'll harvest a tree, then they'll plant another one, and in about 10 years, that tree they planted will be grown and they can harvest that. So they come about every 10 years, we got a cycle going. So we just have to be careful about how we use lumber so that we're replenishing the lumber supply and not just using it all up. There's a picture on page 370 of people going to the mountaintop in Indonesia and harvesting wood that they export to other countries. Have you ever gone to the lumber yard and looked to see where the lumber is coming from that's being sold at your local Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards? You guys don't even care about this stuff. I am so curious about so many things in life. I want to know. I mean, I picked up something the other day. Oh, a can of nuts. No, it was I was buying some trail mix for a granddaughter. And I was looking at it, I said, where did all the stuff in here come from? And they put on the can where it came from. You say, I don't want to know. Just feed me the trail mix. Okay. Well, try to keep up with this stuff. Use the internet to inform yourself. You don't have to be as curious as I am. You know what my sister says? It's not curiosity, Tom. You're just nosy. I'm going, wait a minute. I just want to know what's going on. She goes, it's better not to know. Just eat it and don't ask where it came from. Well, have a good weekend. On Monday, we'll start the next chapter. That would be chapter 10, wouldn't it?